analysis, including asset protection, investments, estate and legacy planning, taxes, and the bedrock of any retirement, income. Call 630-934-1855. That's 630-934-1855. And at alphawealthgroup.com. The Alpha Wealth Group. Retirement made simple. Advisory services through Retirement Wealth Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Insurance and annuities offered through Alpha Wealth Group, licensed in Illinois.
We go over now to Jim Talamonte in the AM 560 Traffic Center.
Metra has a delay on the Milwaukee North Line this morning. There's a track obstruction near Mayfair. Looking to the southwest in Summit, there's a crash at the busy intersection of Archer and Harlem. Kennedy outbound traffic is jammed from before Fullerton to Kimball. All traffic is being forced off at Addison and allowed back on at Addison due to a crash blocking everything right now. Again, in the area between Kimball and Addison. Inbound, it's 21 minutes, so O'Hare to downtown. Down Stevenson, 32 minutes, 3:55 to Lakeshore Drive. Delay start around Ashland. On Ryan, it gets heavy at the Stevenson. It's 20 minutes, 95th to downtown. I-57 at the Bishop Ford look great. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
More of Chicago's Morning Answer show comes your way next. Now your official Chicagoland weather forecast. Cooler today. We'll see the sun, though. Temperature going up to 67 degrees. Tonight, clear sky going down to 53. Then tomorrow it'll be breezy and cool again with some periods of sunshine and clouds. High temperature 63 degrees. It's currently 62 degrees. Your next news update is coming up in 30 minutes. For continuous coverage of the latest news, traffic, and weather, go to 560theanswer.com. I'm Elisa Z. Now more of Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by HealthQuest Radio with Dr. David Kobaba. Every Saturday morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump at his briefing yesterday talked a little bit about the prospect of election night violence that is being bandied about. In some quarters, it seems almost encouraged, incredibly. He had this to say.
Well, the question was asked to me about if you have violent demonstrations. Yes, we will put it down very, very quickly if there is. Absolutely.
Are you making fun?
And I think the American public wants to see that.
And talking in conjunction with that about the biggest threat he sees to the November 3rd election. And it's not China or Russia.
If there's any kind of demonstration or violence, there will be nothing that interferes with this vote. There's going to be nothing. The biggest problem we have right now are the ballots. Millions of ballots going out. That's the biggest problem. When you talk about other countries, whether it's China, Russia, or many others that get mentioned, they're in a much better position with these paper ballots to do something than they would ever be under the old system. And that's our biggest problem. Our biggest threat to this election is governors from opposing parties controlling ballots, millions of ballots. To me, that's a much bigger threat than foreign countries.
Since she's now speaking for myself,
that's the name of the book.
Marks, that's right. Let's ask Sarah Huckabee Sanders if she agrees with her old boss. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, former White House press secretary, author of the new book, Speaking for Myself, Faith, Freedom, and the Fight of Our Lives Inside the Trump White House. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Is that a fair statement by the president that that's the greatest threat that the Trump administration sees to the administration of a legitimate election on November 3rd?
Look, I don't have the same access I used to as the press secretary, so the president has information that I don't. But I certainly think we have to do everything we can to make sure the elections are conducted freely and fairly. Some states are more equipped to handle a mail-in ballot process because they've been doing it. Others are trying to create a new system so quickly. I think that could be problematic. But I think the thing we have to look at is how best we can make sure our elections have the highest level of integrity and make sure everyone is allowed to vote but only do so one time I think the president was right when he said that if people can protest in person, they can vote in person. And I think we should encourage people to do that.
Yeah, I love on voting day, waking up and knowing that you could try and make a difference. But in some states, Sarah, they already started early voting, and there hasn't even been a first debate yet. That comes September 29th. I think that's a little bit problematic.
I think that's a huge problem. It's one of the reasons I know the Trump campaign aggressively pushed the Presidential Debate Commission to move up one of the debates or add an additional debate so that they had one before all of the voting started. I think it's a real disservice to the American people to start voting before they ever see the two candidates on stage together demonstrating their capabilities of who is best equipped to lead. And I think that is a true disservice to the American people not to have done that before voting started in so many states.
You heard the president also talk about violence on the streets in response to inquiries and saying that, we will do what is necessary to keep the streets peaceful. And he's sort of in this nether space, which you probably found him in all the time in discussing these matters with the press, even privately, where on the one hand, he is a dictator and he is about to impose an authoritarian regime on the representative republic called America. On the other hand, he is at fault for not coming in with federal law enforcement to stop violence on the streets of Portland, Seattle, Rochester, Lancaster, Kenosha, etc.
I think one of the reasons the president's going to do well in November is because right now there are so many people that are afraid that their community is going to start looking like some of those that you just listed off. And Donald Trump's the only one in the race that has been consistently talking about the need for law and order and shown that he is willing to do what it takes to provide law and order in communities across the country. And I think that's going to be a huge difference maker when people go to the polls. People want to know they can walk down the streets in their city and not be attacked for wearing a certain type of T-shirt or hat or eating a certain type of food at one restaurant or another. And so I think that the president, that's going to push him certainly in the number of votes on November. I think that's going to be a big deciding factor for a lot of people, and he definitely, I think, has a lot more credibility on that issue.
Speaking of restaurants, do you mention what happened to you in June of 2018 when you were at that Red Hen restaurant? I shouldn't even say their name. And they asked you to leave because you work for President Trump?
Unfortunately, I did relive that moment in the pages of my book, but I felt like it was important for people to know just how nasty the liberal mob had become and has become. It certainly hasn't gone away. It's gotten much worse. And they kicked my family out of a restaurant, but they didn't stop there. And this is one of the things I write about in the book that a lot of people don't know, is that after they kicked us out of the restaurant, my husband and I went home. The rest of our family went to another restaurant across the street, and the restaurant owner of the Red Hen followed them, gathered a group of friends, and protested them outside of a second restaurant. And it wasn't until a member of my family came outside and said, hey, and keep in mind that several members, this is my extended family, several members of that family are not Trump supporters and had actually voted for Hillary Clinton, and came outside and said, look, Sarah's not even here. And you're not helping our cause. Go home. Wow. And so eventually they left. But the fact that they followed them just because of their association with me to a second restaurant to protest them, I think shows just how out of hand the liberal mob has become.
Yeah, I mean, the cancel culture, as it's called, predated that incident in Lexington. But I kind of consider you the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of cancel culture, because I really think it escalated from there. Because after that happened to you and your family, the response from the ruling class inside the Beltway was very instructive. And what was the response? The response from the left quarters, like Maxine Waters' little piece of turf there, was yes. Go after members of the administration, shame them in public. And subsequent to that, you had Ted Cruz and his wife accosted at a restaurant in D.C. And then, as you said, it's just intensified from there. So it seems like that moment with you and your family was really actually a watershed moment in terms of the speed at which our culture has since degraded.
I think certainly that was the beginning time frame of when it just really got so bad. I certainly never been given that title, so I'll be sure to
Yes.
file that one away.
Archduke Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Yes.
I mean, I've never been an Archduke before, so that's kind of exciting. So.
But I mean, what the comment on the culture? I mean, we've seen now a former colleague of yours, Kellyanne Conway, with the division of political opinion in her household. Now, both her and her husband taking a step away from politics because of how vicious it is and how painful it probably is for members of the family that are not didn't volunteer to be in the fray like you did or Kellyanne Conway did or her husband did. And I know you in your book you write about the toll it takes on family.
Yeah, it can be extremely difficult. I have 3 young kids, and one of the hardest parts as a parent, my kids are 8, 6, and 5 now, and my youngest was 1.5 when I started at the White House. And one of the most difficult things, I was the first White House press secretary in the history of our country to have Secret Service protection. And as a parent, getting to a place where obviously you want to protect your kids, and having people say unkind things is difficult, but they'll survive that. But once you have a real and credible threat against you, that changes the game very significantly. And that was probably one of the more difficult things, is knowing that my job was making it much harder for me to keep my kids safe.
Well,
and that was a really hard thing to go through.
Yeah, and less serious things, but just to give people the extent of this, you mentioned in your book your husband got kicked out of his fantasy football league.
Oh, that's...
Yeah, you would think of all things, it's not even real. I was just like, this isn't even a real game. And it was just the lengths that people were willing to go to. And I know that that's not, the end of the world by any stretch. And many people deal with certainly far more difficult things. And the reason I included that is because I wanted people to understand the extent of how far and wide it can impact people's day-to-day life. I think one of the most awful things that we've seen in cancel culture are some of the moments with kids. Nicholas Sandmann in particular, the young kid, and how quick the media was to come after and destroy a 17-year-old kid. They were almost giddy with excitement at the fact they had this video of a kid, a MAGA hat wearing kid, that they thought had been disrespectful, and they couldn't run it and air it fast enough and spread that malicious attack on a 17-year-old.
But it didn't stop there. I mean, they tried to make the college that accepted him rescind their offer. They death threats to the school, bomb threats to the school. I mean, they tried to make his life hell.
Yeah, and I've never in my life could imagine that as a culture we would be so willing to destroy the life of a 17-year-old kid. Not too long ago, there was a little boy wearing a MAGA hat. I think he was 7 or 8 years old at an event where 2 girls, they were much older, I think they were 17 or 18, ripped the hat off a little boy, stole it, and refused to give it back. They ended up getting charged. And I'm like, what is happening in our society when a child can't wear a hat supporting a political candidate without fear of being attacked? It just shows just how out of control the liberal mob has become. And one of the reasons that I'm glad we have a president that's so willing to fight back and so willing to stand up and say, this is not going to continue on my watch. We will push back, and we will stay strong, and we will continue to fight for the things that we believe in. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I wanted people to know that president and that side of him.
Well, the good news is Nick Sandmann now has more of CNN's money than Ted Turner. So that helped ameliorate some of it. I wanted to get perspective from you. I think people are fascinated to understand what the interaction between somebody who serves as his press secretary, particularly because of his unique communication styles and the channels he uses, how that interaction works. How do you try to temper some of the things he says or does? What's the relationship like in terms of that interplay, the back and forth?
I had a very good relationship with the president, still do, and because of that, and because he knew that I wasn't coming in with my own agenda, I was very candid with him. When I didn't like something, I said so. When I thought something was good, I said that. Sometimes he listened, and sometimes he didn't. But at the end of the day, he's the president, and he was the one that the American people elected to make decisions. He's the one that they wanted to drive an agenda, and my job was to support that. And so I did that in the best way that I could. And certainly I had moments where I pushed back, but my job, once a decision was made, was to go out and try best to effectively communicate what the president was trying to do and what his thinking was and what his vision for the country was.
Can you give us an example of that, where you pushed back and how he responded, whether he took your advice or not, but what that dynamic is like?
See, that's the difference between me and other people. I think those are moments that you have privately. I can say that it happened a number of times. And again, sometimes he listened and sometimes he didn't. But once a decision was made, it wasn't my job to go out and publicly attack it or question it, but to try to put it in the best way possible. And so that was what I did when I had those moments. I did so privately.
Yeah. And do you miss your job, especially during an election year here?
I definitely miss parts of it. There are parts I don't. I miss getting to be around and work with the president every day. I really enjoyed the people that I worked with, and I miss my colleagues. I even miss some of the back and forth with the press, but I'm very happy and loving being able to be home a bit more and spend a lot more time with my kids.
What is your takeaway from that intense relationship you had with the D.C. press corps in terms of just how dishonest or professional or unprofessional they are in the treatment that you got with both privately and publicly?
I think one of the things that I was prepared for coming in was that people would challenge our policy, our agenda, legislation we were supporting, things like that. But I was not prepared for the personal attacks, particularly by members of the mainstream media, whether it was my appearance or my fitness to be a mother or even my ability to bake a pie. Everything was on the table for the media to attack me for. And when you pushed back, the attacks got worse. They called you names, and when they can't win the argument, they always resort to just attacking you personally. Yeah. And that was something I wasn't fully prepared for, and I would love to see that go away and the level of respect in the briefing room come back. It was one of the reasons the president didn't want to continue doing the briefings for a while, is it had become so aggressive that he felt, one, it wasn't a useful way to get information out to the American people, because it became so much about the reporters becoming the story instead of telling America what the story was.
You mean like Jim Acosta?
Yeah, exactly. Trying to have those viral moments, getting into an argument with the press secretary was something some of the people in the room came for. That certainly wasn't representative of everyone. There were people that came every day trying to do a good job, and there were good reporters there, but they were drowned out by the people who simply wanted to put on a show.
Sarah, I loved when you made April Ryan that pie. Did you guys leave on a cordial note, you two?
I wish we could say we did, but, even after I made the pie, things I think were a little better for a bit, but she continued to pretty aggressively attack me. But, sometimes you just have to agree to disagree with people on a number of fronts, and I think that's where April and I landed.
At least you didn't get impersonated by Melissa McCarthy like Sean Spicer. So you have that going for you. She is Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She is, of course, former White House press secretary and the author of the new book, Speaking for Myself, Faith, Freedom, and the Fight of Our Lives Inside the Trump White House. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, thanks for joining us, and good luck with the book.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is